Suzanne Bartels, the Director of Library Services and Instructional Technology, and happy to have you here today. This is our second annual Black History Month lunch discussion, and today we have with us Adrienne Israel, who is the Vice President for Academic Affairs and Academic Dean. I'm going to tell you a little bit about her. Adrienne holds undergraduate and master's degrees from Howard University in English Literature and African Studies, respectively, and a PhD in History from Johns Hopkins University. She's been at Guilford since 1982 and achieved full professorship in History and Intercultural Studies, has served in various administrative capacities with distinction, and is currently Vice President and Dean, as I said. And she's going to talk to you today about her research in progress on the Underground Railroad, specifically centering around the area where the college is located and where historians have identified, they've identified this area as the southern starting point of the Underground Railroad. So, welcome, Adrienne. Thank you very much.
Thank you for the kind invitation, and thanks to all of you for coming out. I prefer speaking extemporaneously. However, given the fact that we don't have a lot of time this afternoon, and I want to leave plenty of time for questions, and I tend to ramble when I get onto something and I get inspired. I want to be sure I cover everything and I do it accurately. So please understand why I'm going to read most of this. I will try to read it slowly and clearly, but if at any point you don't understand me, or if you want me to stop and repeat something, just raise your hand and I will do that. So this is formal, but yet it's informal. Around is Max, you with me? Okay, if I make any mistakes about the Quaker history, and you want to take note of it, please. Yeah, I need some support here on this. Okay, around 1665, when Henry Phillips and his wife arrived in North Carolina from Massachusetts, they were among the first Friends to settle in the new colony. Society of Friends founder George Fox and an Irish Quaker, William Edmondson, later joined them, conducting mission work in the coastal Carolina area of Hertford. New Friends converts joined the Phillips family to establish a community of Quaker farmers in the East. Quaker influence increased in the colony in 1695 when the King of England appointed a Quaker, John Archdale, to be governor of the Carolinas. Under Archdale's leadership, Friends dominated Carolina's first colonial council. Gradually, other Friends from Virginia, England, and Ireland joined the small eastern band of Quakers. In spite of injunctions against slaveholding adopted by Pennsylvania Quakers in the north, the Friends in eastern North Carolina owned African slaves and depended on their labor to make their land commercially successful. Meanwhile, in the mid-1700s, Quakers from Pennsylvania, Virginia, and Nantucket Island, Massachusetts, migrated to central Piedmont, North Carolina, and settled in Cane Creek and New Garden, on land that became Alamance and Guilford counties. The new arrivals zealously attacked slaveholding by the Quakers in the eastern part of the state, who had settled there before they arrived. Members of Guilford County's New Garden Friends meeting launched a relentless campaign that in 1778 resulted in North Carolina yearly meeting forbidding Quakers from buying or selling slaves. The yearly meeting also offered to help Quaker slave owners secure manumission, or legal freedom for their slaves through the court system. But in spite of the yearly meeting's stern injunctions and their efforts to help their fellow Quakers free themselves of slavery, many Friends in the East, in fact most of them, chose to keep their human property, claiming that freeing them would cause them harm since black people were unable to take care of themselves. Well, the Eastern Quakers were also restrained from getting rid of their slaves because commercial agriculture in eastern North Carolina depended on slave labor, much as it now depends on cheap migrant labor from Mexico and other Latin American countries. Most of the slave owners in North Carolina owned 5 or fewer slaves, but a significant minority, about 43% of all the state's slave owners, had more than 5, and a small minority of large plantation owners usually owned more than 20. Most of these large slave owners pursued mixed farming and raised livestock for the market. In the Piedmont, slaves were vital to the economies of neighboring Rockingham, Randolph, and Chatham counties, and they were essential to the tobacco growers in nearby Caswell County. But slave labor was not as essential in Guilford County, and slaves were never more than 20% of Guilford County's population. In contrast, slaves were a slight majority in some of the eastern counties, and a little more than 33% of the state's entire population throughout the antebellum period. So even though the Guilford County agricultural production did not depend on slave labor, the county's steady growth as a commercial center and a transportation hub, even in the mid-1800s, and as a trade center, made the domestic slave trade a lucrative business in this county. The area, including the village of Greensboro, was an active site for slave traders who frequently bought slaves in Guilford County and forced them to walk hundreds of miles to be sold to cotton plantation owners in Mississippi and Alabama, and to rice and cotton growers in Louisiana. The internal or domestic slave trade intensified and became more lucrative between 1848 and 1860, making local merchants increasingly hostile toward abolitionists and resulting in greater persecution against those who tried to help the enslaved people to freedom. In other words, what I'm saying is that as time went on, hostility toward abolitionism and toward the Underground Railroad grew. And actually, slavery grew in North Carolina in the era just before the Civil War. And it appeared to plantation owners that their economy was going to endure for at least another 100 years. Well, in fact, Guilford County had less at stake in defending the system of slavery than its neighboring counties, and its citizens seemed less committed to maintaining absolute control over the black population. Nevertheless, Guilford County slave owners who lost their human property through escape spent a considerable amount of time and money trying to retrieve them. As early as 1797, advertisements for Guilford County's fugitive slaves appeared in local and area newspapers. In one revealing notice dated June 26, 1797, slave owner David, I'm going to probably mispronounce his name, but it's M''A''D''O''W. I'm going to call him Maddow. Speculated that the man he wanted back, 22-year-old Jacob, was probably headed for Petersburg, Virginia. Maddow warned anyone who might be harboring or carrying him off of the penalties that they would suffer under the law. The fact that Maddow issued this warning indicates that unknown persons in the area must have been helping fugitives to escape, even as early as 1797. The legal penalties for aiding runaway slaves were certainly severe, but the penalties for the fugitives themselves were far worse. During the colonial period, after the 1739 Stonewall Rebellion near Charleston, South Carolina, the North Carolina General Assembly passed legislation to frighten potential runaways. The laws provided that a captured runaway slave who refused to name his or her owner should be moved from one county to another until the owner was located. In each county, the captured man was to receive 39 lashes. If the owner were never found, the magistrate could hire out the prisoner and force him to continuously wear an iron collar. The new laws also provided that runaway slaves who failed to surrender could be shot, and that 3 or more slaves found guilty of conspiracy to rebel would be put to death. Since the courts interpreted slaves running away in groups as a form of rebellion, this law meant death for many recaptured slaves. As compensation to owners for executed slaves began to drain the colony's treasury, the General Assembly passed a new law authorizing castration instead of execution for male offenders. There were 16 of these castrations before this aspect of the law was finally repealed in 1764. Well, in spite of the state's brutally punitive laws, enslaved people in Guilford County continued to run away. In September of 1802, an advertisement appeared for a slave couple suspected of heading for Maryland, where they had come from. 2 years later, William McDowell advertised another fugitive, this one suspected of heading east and trying to escape by boat. In 1808, McDowell submitted a third advertisement. This time, a young couple had escaped. He described them as a black Negro man named Moses and his bright mulatto wife named Nance. McDowell thought they would go north, indicating that they were on a quest for freedom. In a notice dated April 8, 1814, Levin Adelet stated confidently that the fugitive he sought to reclaim, quote, a Negro man named Kurt, has no motive in running away but to get free, and may attempt to go to the Ohio or Delaware or the lower end of the state. Adelet was a wealthy farmer who in 1820 owned 9 slaves, twice the average for the state, 3 males and 1 female between the ages of 14 and 26, and 3 males and 1 female under age 14. His large extended family included female relatives and a wealthy slave owner, also a female, Tabitha Adelet, who owned 5 slaves. In the advertisement for the return of his slave, Adelet's comments revealed that as early as 1814, some of the enslaved in Guilford County were aware of routes to the north and had definite destinations in mind who they fled. The fugitives hunted by Adelet and McDowell were evidently aware of possible routes to freedom, whether they reached their destination or not. A long description of a runaway slave published in the Greensboro newspaper in 1832 illustrated the determination to be free, which they displayed. Dated May 25th, 1832, the notice reports a 43-year-old blacksmith named Dick. Now at that time, 43 was considered old because the average person probably didn't live past 49 or 50. So this blacksmith Dick, who had once belonged to the late Colonel John Thompson, one of Guilford County's most prominent slave owners, had attempted to escape 2 previous times. The first time he had headed north toward Ohio, where he was captured nearly 200 miles from the Ohio River. The second time he escaped to Wilmington, North Carolina, where both slaves and free blacks were known to harbor fugitives. But he was captured again. The 1832 advertisement indicated that he was once more seeking freedom, this time accompanied by another blacksmith, a younger man named Henson, who had escaped from slavery in Salisbury. Historian Freddie Parker has included 16 of these advertisements for runaway slaves from Guilford County in a compilation of notices that he put together that extended from 1791 to 1840. In case any of you would like to know more about this, they're very interesting slides that I've got a couple that I put together for our presentation. And I'm not going to make any excuses for not knowing what I'm doing. I'm just going to try to do it. Okay, this is what they look like. I know you can't read them. They're hard to read even when you can see them. But anyway, I wanted you to just get a sense of what they're saying, so I wrote out the text, and I'll read it to you. Run away from the subscriber on the 18th, living in Guilford County, a likely young Negro fellow of a dark complexion and about 5 feet 10 inches high, round stooping shoulders, a small leg, a long, broad, flat foot, has a handsome face but a narrow chin, is about 24 years of age and called Moses. He came from the state of Maryland where he followed the water with his master. That is, he came on the ocean. He has sailed around to Norfolk and Washington in this state. He is a pleasant and well-spoken fellow and delights in going on the water. Since he left me, I have learned that his intention was to try to get to Washington or some of the seaport towns in this state. He will probably pass for a free man. This is the point that I wanted you to ponder here. He will probably pass for a free man. You see this in more, probably the majority of the notices say that most of the runaway slaves they're looking for are probably disguising themselves as free men. He took away with him a good castor hat, a cotton shirt, a pair of pantaloons striped with a large stripe of white and a small one of blue. Notice the detail. And a pair of sharp-toed shoes. Any person who will take up said Negro and secure him so that I get him again shall have $10 reward. I'm not sure how much $10 was worth at this time, 1804, but I'm sure it probably is close to $500 or around that, about today. Because you could buy a home for $15 at the time, and slaves were the second, the most, let's say, of capital or people say capital or property that people owned in the South. Next to their land, their slaves were the most valuable. So what looks like small change to us was really a significant amount of money. So they shall have $10 reward, or if they bring him to me, I will make them a reasonable satisfaction. I forewarn any captain or master of a vessel from taking in, concealing, or running off with said Negro man under the penalty of what the law directs. So this appeared in 1804. I tried to show some later ones. Levin Adelet, a wealthy slave owner in this area, put this one out, another $10 reward. And this one says, a runaway on the 19th of February last, a Negro man named Kurt, between 20 and 30 years old, 5 feet 10 or 11 inches high, very black, cunning, and artful. Can write a tolerably good hand. It is probable, note again, he has a pass with him with a number of names counterfeited to it, and he may attempt to counterfeit the county seal. Speaks quick, is a little hollow-eyed, rather knock-kneed, and had with him a pair of leather breeches, a black, fully, I think it's lined coat. I missed this, I couldn't really read this. I think it's a fully lined coat. Other clothing not recollected. It is possible he will change his clothing and make use of many devices to deceive the people, as he has a great deal of assurance. In other words, he's a confident person. He has no motive of running away but to get free. And any attempt to go to the Ohio or Delaware or the lower end of the state, and he may, it says, the above reward will be given by the subscriber living in Guilford County, North Carolina, for the delivery or information of said runaway, so that I may get him. Another thing I noticed about these ads, which is counter to what we normally think of when we visualize runaway slaves, and which I have discovered in reading accounts of people who participated in this endeavor in other parts of the country. Many of them took clothes with them. They weren't naked and destitute, as we see in some of the anti-slavery posters, some of the propaganda that was produced by the abolitionists depict the runaway slaves as all being just broke and hungry and no clothes and no shoes on, and kind of just went off one night with no plan and didn't have a clue of where they were going. But most of the evidence that I've uncovered indicates that most of the people who were really serious about escaping had a plan. They had disguises, they had clothes, and some of them, is one account of a man who tried to help people across the Ohio River, John Parker. He was a free black man who lived in Ohio on the Ohio River. He complained because many of the women who were trying to escape had taken all of their mistresses, their owners' clothes that they could carry, and had filled the boat with these clothes, and he had to force them to throw the clothes overboard so that he could get them across the river. So I thought that was interesting. He said that on many occasions he had to just tell the women, no, you can't take anything with you. You've got to come with what you've got. And some of the men as well. He said there was one man who had a stack of hats that he had taken from his owner, and he was trying to carry all these hats with him, and he said no deal. Anyway, this one is a little, the last one I'm going to show. This one is $50 reward, which is far more substantial than the others. This is ran away from the subscriber living in Guilford County on the 20th of June. Now this is later, 1823. Now the price of slaves also increased over time. So that by the 1830s, 1840s, the price of slaves had more than doubled and tripled. This is two Negroes, a man and a woman, Caleb and Judy. Caleb is about 30 years of age, light complexion, stout, made, broad across the shoulders, speaks slowly, is about 5 feet 8 or 9 inches high. He has a long, loping walk. Notice the detail. See, the people who owned these enslaved people, they didn't look at them as like just a big crowd of people. They knew them name by name, person by person. They knew specifics about their character and how they looked and how they behaved. He has a long, loping walk and bends forward considerably as he walks. He has marks of the whip. He had on, when he went away, a brown, I have no idea what a bambazette surtout is. I just tried my best to figure out what that was. So it's some kind of coat. A striped yarn, black and white jacket, blue cotton pantaloons, and a wool hat. Judy is about 40 years of age. So the man is 30 and she's 40. Middle-sized, copper-colored, quick-spoken, and blinks her eyes very much when detected in an error, or when she's lying, I suppose. She also had the mark of the whip. Judy took, among other clothing, the following with her: a blue grounded cotton calico frock and 2 muslin ones. So she took about 3 or 4 dresses with her, an old-fashioned black silk bonnet. She is an excellent weaver. I suppose they are lurking about as free persons. I will give the above reward for their delivery to me, or confinement in jail, so that I get them in proportion for either. So one or the other he was going to pay. That's Abraham Peoples in Guilford County. So I just wanted to share these with you. These are some of the primary sources that are available about slavery and runaway slaves, and give you some hints about the Underground Railroad. They're not directly referencing the Underground Railroad, but it gives you a sense that they did know where they were going and they were expecting help. Organized abolition in the South probably began here in on this land where we stand, when New Garden Friends Meeting organized North Carolina's first manumission society. Again, a manumission society is a group that facilitates the security of freedom for the enslaved. Either they raise money to pay the owner, but you have to do it legally and go through the courts. And many times the courts didn't want to free people. And so this manumission business was very serious, and sometimes they met with a lot of opposition. They held their meetings at the New Garden Meeting House, which I believe was located out in front of where Duke Hall is now. Is that right, Max? Is that where or was it over here? Okay. So they held their meetings at the New Garden Meeting House, and also at the Quakers settlement at Deep River, which I believe is in High Point. Because of the activism of Quakers at the Deep River meeting, some historians, it might not be that one, I don't know, but anyway, some historians have suggested that the first southern depot on the Underground Railroad might have been located in southwest Guilford County near the Randolph County line, and not at New Garden meeting, as we have long supposed. In addition, friends at the Cane Creek meeting also helped the enslaved to escape. thereby creating a kind of informal community of support among friends in the two counties, upon which desperate fugitives could often depend for help. Now, I'm not sure, I think the Cane Creek meeting is south of here, isn't it? It's east, okay. In Burlington, in the Burlington area? Snow Camp, good. Thank you. In the Snow Camp area, whereas in the old spiritual Deep River, my home is over Jordan, Deep River, I want to cross over into campground. That was a signal that people used. That song was a signal that they want to cross, and that makes sense. Cross over from Deep River, Friends meeting, over to the Cane Creek meeting in Burlington. So this aspect of Underground Railroad activity in Guilford County is relatively well known, but little attention has been given to another aspect of the network which was vital for its success: the anti-slavery underground activities of enslaved and free black people who lived in Guilford County. Most fugitive slaves depended on their own ingenuity and on help from other black people, enslaved or free. And most of them did not really trust white people to help them, and they really shouldn't have trusted all the black people either, because some of them were working for the slave owners and were being rewarded for turning people in. So I don't think we should romanticize this. It was very difficult to tell who was on your side and who was not, and you couldn't do it by whether they were white or black. And really, there was a lot of coding that was done so you would be sure that this person is someone you could trust. In his memoirs, Quaker abolitionist Addison Coffin, the younger cousin of Levi Coffin, described how a free black woman named Vina helped fugitive slaves by giving them her deceased husband's free papers. Free papers are what you get when you're legally free or manumitted and you have a court record. And you had to carry, if you were a free black person in a slave state, and even in the North, in many cases, you had to have this with you all the time. Just like in South Africa, you had to carry a pass during apartheid to prove that you were, in fact, legally free. So the fugitives used his document to convince authorities that they were legitimate travelers, accompanying Quakers who were migrating from North Carolina to Indiana or visiting their friends. The papers had belonged to Vina's late husband, Archibald Curry, locally known as Arch Curry. He was a longtime resident and a former landowner in the Horsepen Creek area, northwest of the current Guilford College campus. Writing in 1880, Addison Coffin recalled Vina Curry and her courageous activities. This is what he wrote. There was a free Negro named Arch Curry living near our home, who died a few years after father. His widow's name was Vina. She was the washerwoman for the boarding school for several years. She was shrewd and discerning, and would suffer her husband's free papers to be stolen. This was done 15 times to my knowledge. When an intelligent fugitive presented himself who would fill Arch Curry's standard, and there were one or more families of trusty immigrants coming west, the free papers were stolen and the fugitive sent through as a free man to Levi Coffin, who returned the papers in safety. This was done occasionally with other papers, but none were ever used like those of Arch Curry. And Levi Curry affirmed this account in his own reminiscences. The boarding school was established in 1834. In 1837, it became the forerunner of Guilford College. In 1820, as background, Archibald Curry was one of about 30 free black farmers in Guilford County. All the county's free black people lived in the countryside, not in town, and were either independent farmers like Curry or worked for and lived on the property of white families. Some of these white families were slave owners. So they would have slaves on their property, and they would also have free black people on their property. In some states, like Maryland, for example, if you were a free black person, it was better to connect yourself with a white landowner, whether he or she was a slaveholder or not, because you had to get their permission to travel more than 10 miles from home. So you had to have a note from that person, like a patron, that you could in fact travel, even though you had papers saying you were free. That's why Ira Berlin and other historians have called these people, they're really not free slaves, and that's where that term free slaves came from, which I don't think is accurate, because there was a difference between them and the enslaved. But some free blacks apparently worked for themselves and for white farmers. But a few of them, like Curry, owned their own land and probably didn't have to labor for money, but was able to sell his produce. In 1820, Curry bought 3 acres along Horsepen Creek from Isaiah Baldwin. The land adjoined David Edwards' property, and the following year, Edwards sold Curry another 9 3/4 acres, giving Curry a total of about 15 acres, a modest holding that cost a total of $56.50. Curry sold the land 6 years later for $125. Arch Curry had apparently moved to Guilford County from Robeson County, about 150 miles southeast of Greensboro. A Scottish immigrant named Archibald Curry had settled in Robeson County in the 1700s, and his family may have owned the black Archibald Curry at some point in his life. But at any rate, he's listed as a free man. I found him in the census in Robeson County, that is Archibald Curry, and he was free when he left. In 1820, Archibald Curry of Guilford County, his family consisted of 4 members, he and his wife and 2 daughters. 10 years later, in 1830, his family had grown to 9 people, including a son-in-law and grandchildren. Since Archibald Curry was not listed in the 1840 census for Guilford County, he had probably died, as Addison said, sometime in the 1830s. Through his widow's ingenuity in using his free papers after his death, at least 15 men probably escaped to Ohio or Indiana and beyond. Guilford County's underground conductors frequently use such ruses as the one Vina Curry employed. In his reminiscences, which I will not read this part, because I feel like we're getting too long, but in his reminiscences, Levi Coffin described one escape by a man named Sam who used free papers, and his account indicates that, let me see, I'll read this. Some shrewd young men managed to get hold of free papers belonging to a free colored man in the neighborhood, and even copied them, counterfeiting the names of the signers as well as they could, not stopping to consider the severe penalty attached to such violations of the law. It was so managed that the papers were given to Sam, note here, by a slave. So slaves were involved in this counterfeit activity. And he was instructed not to use them unless he should get into a tight place. Even then, they might not save him. Levi Coffin's account confirms how some enslaved people helped others escape, and that a network developed among Africans, slave and free, to create false identities for fugitives. In an October 1843 letter to 2 of her friends, then this is a letter that Gwen Erickson found for me in our collection. And I have a copy of it, but I decided not to try and copy it and put it on a slide. But you can see it probably if you like in our collection. Well, this distraught young woman, Susan Hubbard, in this letter in 1843 that she wrote to some friends of hers at Snow Camp, she described an escape attempt that led to trouble for her family and was going to force them to leave the county. Susan Hubbard complained that her father, John Hubbard, had been falsely accused of helping a fugitive. According to her account, a significant number of local Quakers were hauled into court over this incident. This is how she describes it. There was a runaway slave harbored at a friend's house of Deep River, and the friend knew he would have to suffer for it, and he just absconded until after court, which was next week. In time of court, there was a great many friends called to be examined about all that had been done, and the respect that is about helping fugitives over the last 5 years. Dugan Clark, Joshua Stanley, and Father were called, and several of the swains, and oh, such an uproar it created. But my father came home clear at that time. So after court, this accused friend came out before the magistrate and accused father of helping him, which was a mistake. He thought it was the only way to save his life and put it on others. Excuse me. Take a little drink. This is water. Okay. According to her account, the unnamed Quaker living in the Deep River area tried in vain to persuade her father not to assist the fugitive. So I got it wrong. The friend in Deep River had tried in vain to persuade her father to help him assist the fugitive. The runaway went to the man's house and wanted help, she wrote. Well, the man wrote a letter to father to meet another friend at his home to tell him what to do for the best. And he said in the letter that he thought the runaway ought to be helped. And all the time, this Negro's master was but 12 miles off. She said her father refused to help the fugitive and tried to convince a sympathetic free man of color not to help him either. She wrote that the fugitive had asked a free black man named Richard Ladd to get a free paper for him. Father found it out and told Ladd not to do a thing. But somehow the slave got a free paper that belonged to one of Richard Ladd's brothers. She claimed that when Richard Ladd tried to retrieve his brother's free papers, the story doesn't make sense, I know. You know, the man gave him the free papers, then he tried to get them back, she's saying. And I think she's doing this, frankly. This letter, I think, reveals a desperate young woman's efforts to try and get her father off. Because you wouldn't give somebody the free papers, your brother's free papers, then you go and try to get them back, as she said. The fugitive refused to return the documents, she said. Ladd then asked her brother, her father, John Hubbard, to try to get the documents back. That's what she wrote, at least. John Hubbard, she said, went to the house where the runaway was hiding and tried to persuade him to return the free papers to Richard Ladd. She then claimed her father attempted to turn the fugitive in to the authorities, but on the way, she claims, to the jail, the fugitive escaped. And he made his way to Indiana, miraculously. Because he had been seen at the house where the fugitive was hiding, her father was implicated in the escape attempt. She insisted that her father was not involved in helping him run away because he feared the consequences. Finally, she concluded her letter this way. Now, on father's behalf, there have so many false tales arisen that he has been advised to leave the country rather than suffer unjustly here. So many Quakers actually did leave this area because they feared death or at least losing their property for helping the fugitives. So John Hubbard may or may not have collaborated with Richard Ladd to help the fugitives, but his daughter's letter illustrates the fact that local free black people were involved with Quakers in efforts to free fugitives from slavery. Some of them had working relationships with these local Quakers. I'm going to end now with one more little story. This is about another free black man who owned land and was closely associated with the county's Quakers. His name is Ellis Mitchell. He also lived in the Horsepen Creek area near the Coffin family. In 1822, Ellis Mitchell bought land from Vestal Coffin, Levi Coffin's uncle and a pioneer of the Underground Railroad in Guilford County. Mitchell and Vestal Coffin signed an agreement whereby Vestal Coffin sold Mitchell 49 acres of land, which is a substantial landowner, much bigger than Arch Curtis, on the waters of Horsepen and Brush Creeks. Mitchell gave Coffin a down payment of $300, then called a bond. So they called it a bond, but it was a down payment. In the Recorder of Deeds office where I found this information, that's what it's called, but I figured out it was a down payment. And Coffin agreed to return the money, which is amazing, if Mitchell did not pay the $150 balance. In 1832, after Vestal Coffin had died, Nathan Coffin, the administrator of his estate, deeded Mitchell the land that he had bought. In 1837, Mitchell and Peyton Corn joined forces to buy 150 acres from Pleasant Hoskins. The land was located on the waters of Hunting Creek branch of the Reedy, Fort, and Haw River. I've got a slide to show you where those places are. And followed Salisbury Road north. This was a substantial land holding that indicated Ellis Mitchell's prosperity. Although no evidence has been discovered as of yet linking Mitchell to the Underground Railroad, it seems unlikely that he would have associated so closely with the Coffin family and been unaware or uninvolved in his operations. So I'm going to show you this slide, which is a map, and I asked Max if he would, if I get confused, so y'all can see where we are. This is Greensboro, in the old spelling, G-O-R-O-U-G-H. This is Greensboro, and this is New Garden. New Garden at that time was a town of its own. Actually, later on, Guilford College was also a town. It was a town called Guilford College, like Elon College used to be. And so this is where we are around here, Max.
Mm-hmm. Right? There's Jamestown.
Okay.
And all plantation. There's the Deep River meeting.
And this Horsepen Creek, could that be New Garden Road? You know where the Horsepen Creek is?
Horsepen Creek comes off of New Garden Road.
Well, that's the creek, I guess.
Yeah.
So I was going to go out and try to find these things before I got caught up in doing administration. That was my last act of research.
This goes along the nature trail.
Okay, so I really haven't gone out to put my hand, don't go back. And this is Reedy Fork that they're talking about. So I don't know if this is the Reedy Fork off of 29 or not. I know there's a Reedy Fork settlement, but I think this is further out.
Old Oak Ridge Road crosses it.
Old Oak Ridge Road?
Right by the old mill of Guilford, 68.
Good. Good. Do you all know where he's talking about 68 out, going by the airport? Yes. So actually, this is Oak Ridge on this map. This is 1808 map of Guilford County. So it gives you some idea. And the Deep River, where would Deep River be?
Deep River's right here.
There, okay. Okay, where is that now?
Same place.
What's it called?
Deep
I
River
mean,
meeting.
what's the town?
It's in between High Point and Greensboro,
Yeah.
north of Jamestown.
Okay, thanks, Max. Thank you. So I wanted just to give you a sense then of where these places are still today. And I'm just going to conclude now. Let's see. This is a description I found. It's Horsepen Creek rises in West Guilford County, flows northeast into Reedy Fork Creek. And there were substantial settlements of free black people all over this area, and of course also where now, I guess across Friendly, there were as well. So I'm intending to continue my research to locate as many of these settlements as I can and try to establish then the connections, because I know Quakers sold, many of them bought their land from Quakers, because many whites would not sell land to African Americans. And I also know that the Quakers who did sell their land, I don't mean any offense by this, they did kind of up the price a bit from what the normal price would be for land. I know that. But it is what it is. Okay, the Underground Railroad's, in conclusion, the Underground Railroad's illegal nature and the severe penalties faced by anyone associated with it were clear and well known. In 1835, for example, free blacks in North Carolina lost the right to vote. They had it before 1835, then they lost it. They could not preach in public, own firearms without a special permit, attend public school, buy or sell alcohol, or even own livestock. If convicted of helping a fugitive escape, a free black man or woman could have been sold into slavery, whether they had been legally freed or not, or whether they were landowners or laborers. Although it was not consistently dependable. The Underground Railroad in Guilford County helped a significant number of fugitives ultimately lead lives as free people within the system. So it wasn't absolute freedom, but it wasn't slavery. And it provides evidence of Southern advocates' social justice rooted in Guilford County and a history of active pursuit of freedom for others in the face of violent opposition, possible financial ruin, jail, enslavement, or even death. Most of those involved remain in the shadows, but persistent research could result in their lives and work becoming more widely known and their effective opposition to slavery more thoroughly understood. So thank you for listening. This is work that I abandoned more or less 13 years ago, and which I intend to resurrect as soon as possible. And I'm just sharing this with you as preliminary. So most of it from primary sources that I secured at the City Hall, basically, where these records are kept. And primary sources, as I said, included wills, land records, tax records, and that kind of thing, and the census reports. So please, if there are any questions, I will try to answer, or any comments anyone wants to make. There's a mic here. Yes,
It would be interesting to know if any of the descendants of the early American settlers are still on their land in Guilford County.
could you say it again? Sorry. Turn it on. Okay, turn it on. I think it's.
Yep.
Okay.
It would be interesting to know, hopefully we'll have time to do this research, to find out if any of the descendants of the early African-American landowners are still here on their land, because that property, Horsepen Creek, has just skyrocketed, and many of the small farmers have sold their land in the last 20 years.
That's a good question. What I have found, just as preliminary, is that a lot of the people who were descendants of those landowners left, they migrated north, and they stopped paying taxes on the land. So a lot of that land was lost to families because of taxes, and they just didn't see, it had no value to them at the time when they left, say in the 50s and 60s. And like the people across the road here, a few of them have held on to their land, but many times they got offers they couldn't refuse. It was a lot of money, a lot of cash at the time offered, and they sold the land. But I do plan to do that using cemeteries. I'm trying to find cemeteries because that is a good source of information if they haven't been built over. But there are a lot of old neglected cemeteries, and you can get names. So that's a good question, good point. I also tried, well, my courage failed me because I looked in the phone book for some of the slave owners. Some of the names, kind of were distinct names. And I found the names, but I just couldn't work up my courage to, hello, I heard you were a slave owner. I'm just doing some research, and I can't figure out a nice segue, frankly. But I do want to know, because I think that's essential that I know both the more of the history of the enslaved people and the free black people, as well as the former slave owners, families of those, because it's a long time ago, but people do keep records, family records. Yeah. Yes.
I know that a lot of the folk who were the most active in the Underground Railroad had either died like Vestal Coffin or moved north like Levi Coffin in the 1820s. What has your research shown about the attitude of the remaining Quakers here about involvement in illegal activities supporting the Underground Railroad? Did that decline?
From what I can tell, Max, the penalties became more and more severe over time. Anti-slavery activity died down and almost out. in Greensboro. Greensboro had been a kind of a center for abolitionism for a long time, but in the 1850s, the only people left on record who were active abolitionists speaking out were two Wesleyan Methodist missionaries who'd come here from Ohio. And from what I discovered reading in the Patriot, at least, I think one of them had been tarred and feathered, and that was a horrible experience, of course, having hot tar poured over your body. And I don't know if he survived it or not. The Wesleyans visibly, I guess, left their mark. Not sure about any of these Society of Friends, because as I said, the problem is there were very few records kept because it was illegal. And I'm trying to look at newspaper accounts from the time to see if there are any indications that they were still involved. But they left in fear, as they said, of their lives, because interestingly enough, the lines hardened. You know, the closer we come to the Civil War, the more slavery seems to be immovable, and the more determined slave owners are to keep their power and keep their wealth. It didn't lessen, it didn't get, you know, we think of always, sometimes history is progress, we're constantly getting better, more enlightened, but not so. And in many ways, it became, even the slave trade resumed in the 1850s, right before the Civil War. So I think many of the Quakers understandably were afraid for their lives. Many of the free blacks were probably afraid for their lives, but they probably kept up Underground Railroad activities anyway. I've just got to find the documentation. Yes?
To add to that, I think the documentation becomes especially challenging post-1820s. And the few examples I'm aware of, it's people that there's not the documentation, it's more through anecdotal information and putting a string of clues and references that in isolated places would not seem like anything, but you add them up. I know there's a few examples of Quakers in eastern North Carolina where it was even more dangerous. There's at least one family that has been documented and verified by the National Underground Railroad's Network to Freedom, and they have a marker for them, but there had to be a lot of research to prove that, and it's not someone that you would automatically think of like Levi Coffin, because they had to maintain that secrecy throughout their time.
And in many ways, although Levi Coffin is an important historical figure, I have a deep respect for the people who stayed, because people who stayed and continued to help people escape and didn't leave. And even his father, Levi Coffin didn't just come out of nowhere. You know, in his reminiscences, he knows that his father had been helping fugitive slaves. And he grew up in a family where this was considered normal. His father, his uncles, his family, the Coffin family, were known as progressives of their time. And actually, you know, in many ways, they've kind of gone into the shadows, and Levi has been lifted up. But there were many things about Levi Coffin, you know, my students don't like when I ask them to read his reminiscences. And I try to tell them, you know, he's a flawed human being like the rest of us. And he wrote probably more honestly about his real feelings than most of us probably would do. You know, he said, for example, he didn't think much of the free black people in Cincinnati where he settled. He settled in Richmond, Indiana, but he also lived in, not Richmond, Indiana, that's where Earl is.
Newport.
Newport, yes. But anyway, he criticized the free black people because he said they were too ostentatious. They wanted to wear, you know, fine clothes and parade around town in Cincinnati, and I guess being a person, he didn't think that was good. He said they couldn't be trusted. But they were very active. The black people in Cincinnati were very active in helping people to escape. So apparently this cultural clash prevented him from respecting them, or his vision of helping the poor and downtrodden people who didn't see themselves necessarily as poor and downtrodden might have bothered him. Yeah, so you know, this is a human experience. So naturally there are going to be flaws in Levi, but I feel his other relatives and the other Quakers have not been sufficiently studied either. the ones who stayed behind. Well, you know, if you ever want to see something tangible about the Underground Railroad, in Jamestown at the museum, there's a man, I think he's in his 80s. He was a graduate of Guilford College in the 50s. And he's still holding it together. And they have a great collection of artifacts. He's holding together the tradition in this area. Right when you go down Jamestown Road and you get to Jamestown, you turn right, you go into town, there's a museum on the left across from the park. And you have to kind of call ahead of time because he and his assistant are both moving on in age, and they need a little forewarning. But that's the best place I've taken my students in this area, because they have the actual false bottom wagon that people travel in. You actually could see how what a tight space they're in, and you can look at those little wheels. Can you imagine metal wheels, no rubber, but iron wheels, and a platform sitting on top of that in a little box? I said, even the people, I'd rather be in the box than up on top, because when it rained, there was no shelter, and they drove these wagons. They did have some covered wagons, but he said a lot of people just went this way. They just counted on getting to an inn or someplace where they could rest. And they went over the mountains to Indiana in what we would consider today rickety wagons, but in their time, these were substantial vehicles. And just to see them, it was, to me, putting your hand on something and actually looking at it up close like that, and have all these things, treasures here in North Carolina that the Smithsonian doesn't even have. It's a real treasure. I think we should try and look at. Yes, Max?
Earl over here across the aisle wrote a piece in the paper a few weeks ago about rebranding Greensboro and has a vision for a museum of the Underground Railroad here. Do you know of those tangible artifacts that you wouldn't have to break in tonight at Mendenhall Plantation and steal from, that could be assembled even if on loan that would represent this history?
Yes, sure. You have to go over and negotiate. I doubt that they'll move them out of the barn, because they're in the actual, they've got about 4 of these wagons in the actual barn. You know, maybe you could talk to them if you got a professional who could assure them that they wouldn't be harmed. Because I was amazed at all the things they have in there. Tools and things from the early 1800s, still intact. You know, still working coin grinders. A lot of people think because it got plantation on it that they were slave owners, but they were not. They were part of this. So I really appreciate this time. My back's starting to hurt, and I'm sure you all have other things you'd like to be doing. And I appreciate being able to share this with you. It's really an honor for me, and I hope the library continues to be a center. We've already been recognized nationally. Here, our library is part of the network to freedom. Yes, our collection, the Friends Historical Collection, is recognized, and we're hoping at one time in the future to have a reenactment here of the Underground Railroad like at Colonial Williamsburg. That's my last dream for my work at Guilford College. I would like to have that done here. I know we can't be Colonial Williamsburg overnight, but I do think we have an opportunity here to become Colonial Williamsburg. I'm saying we can do a reenactment where people could come, and I know there's an interest in this, and so if I don't see it happen, I would like to see it start. So thank you.